I think without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jack Manning, our County Commissioner and a strong supporter of the CDC. He's going to be facilitating the panel, and I'm going to hand it over to him. Let's give him a round of applause.
Okay. Don't hold it against me. I'm County Commissioner. Only 2 years, and there's another reason why I'm excited to be here. But I think you all know how much I love this building and the library board. I appreciate them doing this, and this organization, the Beaver Falls CDC. Know the people well. They've done a great job. Come a long way. CJ and Wendy and the whole board there, and Doug and everybody. And so appreciative and honored to be asked to do this this evening. And I think some of you that know me well know how much I am loyal and dedicated to those people, places, and institutions that have had a profound impact on my life. Many of you are in the audience that I count among having that profound impact on me. But what you may not know is that there's another thing that's had a profound impact on who I am today, and that's that my career started as a shift working lab tech for 8 to 10 years at a petrochemical plant in New Jersey, which finally led to some other things along the way. So when I was asked to do this, there's something about the dignity, the pride, the respect, the mutual admiration I have for people who have worked with their heads, their hearts, and their hands to make something for a living. All work, regardless of the labor, deserves dignity. Everybody that works, and there should be dignity and respect to all workers, regardless of whatever field you're in. But there's just something about working inside those fence lines and the camaraderie that develops when you're part of those kinds of organizations that really struck me. So that's why I'm excited to be here and to help moderate and facilitate this discussion here. So without further ado, why don't we just start with some simple introductions on who you are, where you're from, and who you work for. Paul, would you mind starting us off?
My name is Paul Deppenbrook. I've lived in Beaver Falls most of my life. I worked almost 30 years in a plant down at the lower end of town. You all probably saw it, wondered what the hell we did there. And across from Ford Motor Company. We did a little bit of everything there. Anyhow, I live in Beaver Falls. I raised my family here and plan on staying here till I'm planted.
My name is Tim Orovitz. I also am a original Beaver Falls native. About a year and a half ago, we moved down to Washington County for reasons you wouldn't be interested in. But every time I come down 376 coming back to this town, my heart breaks. My heart is here and will never leave. I love this town, and anything I can do to ever help it, I'll be the first one to step up. With that out of the way, I worked at Standard Steel Specialty, which was a small mill in West Mayfield. Small but old. It's actually, right now, it's nearing its 100th birthday, and it's still going. I was there 42 years, actually 50 if you go back. I worked there between college years as well. So, and I have uncles and things that go back to their original days, which was 1925. So Beaver Falls, like everything else, Standard Steel is part of that fabric. And once you get it in your blood, it's never going out. And I think most of the people probably sitting up here feel that same way. I know all of you do, because otherwise you wouldn't be sitting there either.
How you doing? Tim Bonomo. I was born in Beaver Falls, graduated Beaver Falls, hey Caleb, Beaver Falls High School, and I've lived in Beaver Falls most all my life. When I was 19 years old, I started working at the Moultrip Steel plant, and I worked there for over 3 years until they laid off a bunch of us. And then from there I went to the Colfin Steel plant and worked there for another 4 years, and which was formerly called Townsend. Most of you might remember that. But I grew up on College Hill, which was just 2 blocks away from the main entrance to the B&W plant, and many of my family members worked in that mill. My grandfathers, my dad for a little while, my uncles. So it was a big part of my life, my early childhood, up until I was almost 10 years old when they finally closed it down. So all the memories of that growing up in this town and what it was like back then versus what it is now. So.
Thank you, Jim. Ed Paroli. I'm not from Beaver Falls. I was born and raised in Aliquippa, and I spent off and on between 1968 and 1982 about 9.5 years working in J&L and then LTV. I've recently did work in Beaver Falls for Trails Ministries, and great town. You know, it was kind of a rival. We didn't get up this end too much. You didn't come down that end too much, but I've really enjoyed my time here, and I want to commend the board. I know some of your board members, and some of the people in town here, and I'm just really impressed with what's going on in this town and the heart and soul that's, I think, going to really bring this town back. So, thank you.
Okay, well, Ed, we'll start with you and come back the other way. Everybody has a story. It's something I've learned over the years, but individually, what drew you to the mill, or what influenced your decision to begin working at the mills to begin with?
In Aliquippa, which I think is maybe even Beaver County is and was still, not anymore, but it was. And Aliquippa, the sole purpose that Aliquippa was created, and there's one of the biggest experts that you'll ever find right there, Don Inman, and he knows everything. He's going to raise his hand if I am incorrect, and your arm will probably get sore. And the book that CJ just showed, which I brought to show, it's about. It really is a good book. If you get a chance to read it, it's about the mill. It's about the socioeconomic forces that that went in, and they tie how sports tied all into that. But everybody, to answer your question, just about everybody in Aliquippa worked in the mill. You either worked in the mill or you worked for maybe somebody who did work for the mill, or people whose livelihoods in the stores and commercial business enterprises were all tied to the money that came from the mill. So there was, if there was ever a town that was tied up with steel, it was Aliquippa and J&L. So when I graduated high school in '68, I was getting ready to go to, I went to college, and when I came back after my freshman year, everybody went to the mill, and you could make enough money in the summertime working in the mill to pay for your whole education, for the next year. Those days are gone, but
that's beyond inflation.
Yeah,
right
they're way beyond inflation. So, and then after my freshman year, when I decided, actually Slippery Rock decided I shouldn't go back, but
yeah, we don't have time for that story.
That's
another
but I had
session.
fun. Yeah, it was a good fraternity party. But anyway, but then I went back to work in the mill, worked for about 1.5 years, and made enough money in that 1.5 years to pay for the final 3 years of my education. When I graduated, I had a very marketable degree in political science. They were just beating my door down to get me. So I went back to the mill. You could decide on Wednesday that, I want to get a job. You would go down to the employment office and you'd fill out an application, and on Thursday you'd be working. And, so I worked there for another, I guess, 6 years or so, and I got into their employee development program. As long as you were going for something that would benefit them, they paid 75% of it. So I took a drive to Pitt to see about, getting in something there. I couldn't find a parking place, so I turned around. I came to Geneva. And I got into their business administration, accounting, and I ended up graduating from there. So I spent a total of, from 1968 to 1983, I tell everybody I went to college 5 terms: Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. It's true. So, but anyway, to make a short story long, that's what. Okay.
How about you, Tim?
Wow. Don't forget your greatest degree was that you got a BS in BS.
I got a BS.
I know Ed pretty well. I don't have quite the education he does. I went to the school Hard Knocks, but when I got out of high school, I didn't have much direction in life. I was going to go to community college and didn't really do well at that, so I was kind of just working odd jobs. And my dad said they're hiring 10 positions at Moultrip Steel, and I know someone in there that can get you in, because at this point it wasn't like the B&W and J&L days. Steel mill jobs were hard to find in 1995. It was just few and far between. There was only a handful of mills, and you at that point had to know somebody to get a job there. And they were good paying still, but I had an uncle that worked, a distant uncle that worked at Moultrips, and that's how I got a job there. And for working there for several years, it went, and got laid off. And then I knew someone else who worked at Colfin Steel that got me a job there. But just throughout those years of working in the mill and just getting to know people, it seemed at that time the only people that got hired in those short job opportunities were, through family or friends. So it wasn't quite in abundance. But that's just my short, history with how I got in there.
That's not unusual. And by the way, I wouldn't minimize. The best education I had was those 8 years working shift work with all those folks and learning how to relate to people. And coming from all walks of life, that's a heck of an education you probably got working there, just with all the interactions of the people that you worked with there.
Yeah, when I got hired, I was only 19 years old, and honestly, I was probably one of the youngest guys. The next person was maybe in their mid-30s. So, and it was all the other guys there were in their 60s or 50s. So.
I was 20 when I started.
I learned.
They kind of take you under their wing. And got the outhouse lawyers and everybody telling you.
I learned a lot of life lessons and storytelling and bad jokes at a young age. So.
How about you?
In my case, when I turned 18, I was in college, and my father informed me that I was going to be working in the steel mill for that summer. Now, I also knew at the same time that was going to involve steady 3 to 11. I was 18 years old. That was like a death sentence. So there was no arguing with my father. It just wasn't. And consequently, I worked there for 3 summers, and it was an honest-to-God fact what he was saying about I could work there 1 summer. I made enough money for room and board to cover the whole year. Now, here it is, 50 years forward. I have 2 boys that we put through Penn State. They both worked in the summertime, same as I did, at Standard Steel, because of course I was still there. What they would make paid for about 1/3 of the tuition only for 1 semester. And that, to use your phrase, Jack, that was beyond inflation. I don't know what's happened there. But at any rate, I got out of college, got a teaching degree, taught school for a couple of years. And my mother said, you need to get out of school, teaching school, because I'd come home. I was single then. I'd come home and tell her about the different kids I would throttle during the day because of their mouths. She said, you're going to get sued. And my thought was, I don't have anything, so have at it. But at any rate, I wound up, I couldn't get a full-time job. These jobs that I had teaching school were all permanent sub jobs. And I got married in 1977, thought I need a permanent job. I thought, I know, I'll go back to Standard Steel till I figure out what I want to do long term. 42 years later, I figured out that I wasn't going anyplace else. And that's just how it turned out. My dad, who made me basically go to college to stay out of the mills. Luckily, he died real young, so he didn't see me stay there for 42 years old. But at any rate, that's my story about actually getting into the mills. But as it turned out, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm so glad that it turned out the way it did. Paul?
How'd you get started, Paul?
Well, it's quite interesting. I graduated from high school at 17 years old. So when we got out of school in June, I put all my applications in, and no one would hire me. Said, you got to be 18. So I had a brother-in-law. How many people here from Ambridge? Anybody from Ambridge? Carnivus Vending. You might be too young, but I don't know if Carnivus is still down there. I went and I applied for a job there, and I got hired at Carnivus Vending, and they gave me a Chevy van, 350, 4 on the floor, okay, because you had to drive in Pittsburgh. That was the catch. I had the Pittsburgh route, okay. I worked there for about short period, till right before December of 1973. I'd go through the Liberty tubes, and the cop would be waiting for me every day. I had so many tickets, because you're not allowed to hang that left, but I had to hang that left, because if I didn't, then I got lost. And then the guys would be angry at the shop. So I'd come back, and they'd be all irritated, because now they got to inventory my truck at 7 o'clock. They were supposed to be gone an hour ago. I said, I'm going to the mill in December. In December, I had 5 jobs at 5 different mills. That's how easy it was. I chose Republic, and I didn't mention the name of Republic for one reason when I first told you. I was very fortunate, and there's a gentleman in the crowd here that was fortunate also. We were bought out by 4 different companies in our career, all starting with Republic. We had Republic, the old Republic. We had Republic Engineered Steel, first ESOP. No, I'm sorry. We were Republic LTV division. Half the people in Beaver County didn't know LTV Jones and Lachlan had a plant on 7th Avenue, Beaver Falls. Then we became an ESOP. Republic, LTV didn't want us. They robbed everything off of Republic they could get, stole all the oil industry, stole all the coal, stole all the iron ore mines. Old Republic had more natural resources than anybody around, and anybody that knows LTV, they were corporate raiders. Anybody here dispute that? We'll talk. Anyhow, we became an ESOP. We were the most successful ESOP.
I'm not going to challenge you, that's for sure.
Please don't.
I'm not, no.
Anyhow, we became an ESOP, which I didn't know what the hell an ESOP was, okay? I don't think Bill knew what an ESOP was, but he wouldn't admit that at the time. He wouldn't admit that. Anyhow, we became the most successful ESOP in American history. We were there for approximately 10 years. We did fantastic. We put over $500 million into 9 plants in 5 states, okay? And that was all stolen from us when the company was sold by, the next company was called RTI, Republic Technologies International, okay? They supposedly still exist in some form. Very strange story. A lot more after that. So anyhow, I ended up working at this plant, 4 different companies in the same building, very productive. The good news about the job, what I missed the most, was I was in Steeler country. At 17 years old, I want you to imagine going into every bar, every massage parlor, okay, every restaurant. I had to break a guy's arm over at in Oakland, where the college town is. Everybody thinks it's safe. I had to break a guy's arm in the door. And that was right before December. Then I went over to Butler Street and got robbed. They stole my whole truck. Okay, everything. My alarm was still on. Still can't figure it out to this day. Anyhow, I couldn't get to the steel mill fast enough. It was the best decision I made. I have many fathers from those plants. My dad died very young, at 42 years old. He worked at the B&W up here in College Hill. And I actually worked at B&W for a while when I got laid off at Republic for a short time. I had an in. My aunt was Snowberger's secretary. Anybody know who Snowberger was? He was the guy that did the hiring, okay, and she had the job. So I ended up there, and they tried to get me to stay. I said, no, I just vested a pension back there. There was a big change in ERISA at the time. So the bottom line is, I worked for 4 different companies at Beaver Falls, but I worked at almost every major company connected with steel. And I'll get this back to
Another
Jack.
question. The good news is I think the statute of limitations is over for most of that stuff
Thank
that
God.
you went through before you got to the mill.
I was a Catholic boy going into some of those steps for the first time, and my eyes were very wide open.
I'm sure. So changing the tone. I mean, what's your fondest? You mentioned you had a bunch of fathers raising you. But what do you miss most about those days working in the mill?
I have to date that. Prior to 1982, around 1982 and back to 73, there was a camaraderie that was unbelievable, okay? And I had many fathers. I actually saved Uncle Mel. I know Bill knows who Uncle Mel is. I won't mention his last name. I saved that man's life. He was having a heart attack in the doorway to the old shop, and he wouldn't quit. So I got him, I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him across, called an ambulance, and he had open heart surgery that day. That's probably one of my finest memories, because I still see this man today. He's 80, I believe he's 80 years old, still doing good, and still singing about some radio station by the name of Froggy. I mean, he would just sing about it every day. There's many memories, okay, and there's so many. If I can add one other one, there was a gentleman, he passed away in Providence in 2018, and I actually cared for him for about the last 3 years, severe diabetic, fishing buddy. Most people in Beaver County don't know this, but in 1982, we were decimated, and he helped start a food bank, which is now where the United Way is in Bridgewater, and I think it's the Masonic Lodge Hall down there now. But anyhow, we started a food bank, and the guy's name was Joe Trzynski. He was the mayor of Eastville. That's a joke, by the way. The mayor of Eastville is like, nobody, he bought a police car with no motor and parked it at the end of the bridge, and that was his police money. He just tried to get people to slow down, but this gentleman got over $16 million worth of food for the people in Beaver County, okay? And he set up a distribution plan. He was going to Geneva, and they hated him because he was Union, okay? But and he was Catholic, okay? So he would argue with the religious side of Geneva College.
Catholic more than Union?
Oh.
I don't know, Brad would say.
Well, he could hang. He could hang with the Protestants as well as the Catholics. But he got $16 million, and he would talk about Ronnie's cheese, and I had no idea what the hell he was talking about till the first 18-wheeler pulled in, and we had to unload it. Another one, how many people knew Bill Livingston? Magistrate Livingston. Bill Livingston was a guard at B&W at the time. That's how I got to know him. And he was volunteering his time at the United Way, same as we all were. And I had an illustrious time with him. Bill ended up living a block away from me before he died. Wonderful man, good politician, good judge. The bottom line, we were all involved in a process. Now, our claim to fame today, the Pittsburgh area food bank was our baby. We created it. And if it wasn't for Joe. So that's probably our finest memory. Now, in the mill, I'd have to say it was a gentleman sitting over here that used to like to cone people with these white cups. They would put grease around the bottom of them. And you didn't know, well, because you were working. He never did any work, you know. But he would put this cone on your head, okay? And it became a huge thing to where they were coning the plant superintendent. He didn't take the joke very well. But the bottom line is there's so many. I could go on and on and on.
How about you, Tim? What do you miss most about those days? Miss most, yeah. Or fondest memory?
I don't miss that much about it. I like being retired, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm trying not to hold it against you that you moved out of the county. It was the county.
No, I'll reiterate the same thing. I think it's probably this way with most of you folks out there that have worked any place. a long time, you miss the people, and I do miss the people. And the worst part about it for me is being there as long as I was. I saw a lot of people come and go, and when I say come and go, I mean go. Okay, a lot of my old friends, they died off, and they're dying off now, and won't be long I'll be joining them. But the thing is I made so many lifelong friends there. And, you know, I would hang out with these people after work and got to know their families. And there's a lot to be said for that. And that's the kind of thing anymore. You don't have that platform to do that anymore. Back then, you worked in a place, even as small as we were, we had 120 hourly employees, which that paled in comparison to the B&W and Crucible and J&L. They had thousands of guys. But 120 people, you got to know these people and got to hang out with them and know their families and knew everything about them. And I do miss that. And the only other thing that, and there may be some of you folks that will remember this, just a quick Steel story. When I was a kid, I used to love Arby's, and the only place there was an Arby's was down by Northern Lights Shopping Center, which that might as well have been Canada. That was so far away, because I didn't have a car or anything else. But anyway, when I got a driver's license and started making a little money, I can remember thinking to myself, I'm going down there, and I'm going to buy all the roast beef sandwiches I can possibly eat because I got this money. And I did that. I took actually a buddy of mine, Terry Tellman. We went down there. We bought all these sandwiches, and it was a hot summer day. And the air down there was absolute, I'm not kidding, it was yellow. J&L was doing something, I'm not sure. They were discharging something into the air. But it smelled like money. I mean, you can say what you want. There's a lot of bad that goes with that. But it was money. As long as they were doing what they were doing, bad or good, they were making money, and a lot of people in Beaver County were making it as well. But we went down there, and it smelled very sulfuric, I might add. And it did detract from the sandwiches a little bit. But it was a brain checkpoint for me. I'll never forget that day.
Well, the steel mill guys, there was camaraderie, and everyone loved the horse around constantly. It was just such a different group of different ages and from all kinds of different ethnicities, and a lot of old guys. And this one guy, he was classic. I remember my first week in the mill. He used to take a fishing line, and he had this fake bat. And he strung it up over the beam, and he would just sit there, and he would wait for you to walk by, and he would drop that bat, and he would, get you to jump. They did the coffee cup, grease on the coffee cup with the styrofoam, and then Conan, yeah, they did that in our mill too. That must be like a universal.
Spray paint your shoes.
Looked like bowling shoes. Yeah, they did that. To hang a tail on your belt, you walk around for hours. All those things. It was a lot of fun, but we did a lot of stuff together. We would go out afterwards and have fun, and we had an annual softball league, and we played in the summers and did all those things. But my greatest memories, I had at Maltrip Steel, I made a lot of great friends, a lot of older men that mentored me, and it was a great routine and just working on the machines and learning all the different things. But I think growing up though in Beaver Falls. And my greatest memories are honestly on College Hill, just remembering that the B&W was still in full swing at that time, and it was just such a different world. Imagine how many people worked there, 10,000, 11, I don't know the number. Six, okay, it seemed like so many, but yeah, just the constant truck traffic, and all that really remains of that is that one little guardhouse that's on the 37th Street. But that whole mill was just there, and I just remember as a kid, how busy it was all the time, and the noise. I grew up 2 blocks. You could just always hear. They made the tubular steel there, yeah. Just the constant clanging, bang. Anyone that lived in Beaver Falls would remember that. And so all of a sudden, then it like 1987 or 88, it just like stopped, and it was like unbelievable. Even everything, it changed the geographics of the downtown area, and everything was so much different. So that's my greatest memories of the steel industry, not so much as me. I have a lot of memories working there myself in the 6-year period that I worked through the 2 different mills, but it was more so my childhood. That everyone, as a child, you have a lot of memories. But that was a big part of my first 10 years of life. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was the camaraderie and the relationships with your coworkers, and you kind of think back, why was that so? I mean, you were all kind of in the same situation. You weren't competing with anybody on your job. You didn't have to worry about, I got to outdo this guy or that. There's a promotion. I mean, everything was based on seniority. You got more time, you moved up to the next, to the next job, and there was really a lot of support, and a lot of the older guys really did help. Like, I was working in the tin mill labor gang time. I think it was 1977. There was a whole bunch of people working there, but there was 5 of us that all bought houses probably within a 3 or 4 month period. So you didn't ask anybody for help to move. The 5 of us got, the 3 of them had pickup trucks. So, on a Saturday, you'd all meet, you'd, load up the trucks, you'd, help each other move. There was usually a lot of liquid refreshments involved, which even just thinking about it, I don't think I ever paid for any kind of repair or improvement on my house until probably maybe 20 years ago or so. You had friends who were electricians on a mill. You had friends who were carpenters, or just about pipe fitters, just about any job that you needed, and they were always willing, to do it. And I mean, this even goes back when I was a kid. My father worked in the mill for about 20-some years before he became postmaster in Aliquippa, and just about every improvement in my house growing up, whenever something was needed done, there was a gang of guys there who would do it, and everybody did it for everybody else. And probably on the street where I grew up, probably at least 2/3 of the people who lived there all worked in the mill. So you grew up. I mean, you talk about kind of like a homogeneous environment. Grew up in Crestmont Village, which was one of the first post-war housing developments up in Hopewell, and it was, like I said, just about everybody's dad worked in the mill. Everybody's mom stayed home, and all the kids, ran the streets. It was, it was a good time. My wife found a book, and this is another. Okay, this is for our reading list. This will be on your assignment. It's a kid's book. It's called No Star Night, and it was written by a woman actually who grew up in Weirton, West Virginia. But when I read it, I mean, it could have been written about Aliquippa or Midland or Beaver Falls or Ambridge, and what growing up was like at that time. And so, if, it might be a little heavy reading for you all, but I think you'd handle it. And then, speaking of, I was working in the mill. I was 1 semester away from finishing Geneva when, just like overnight, the bottom fell out. And Dawn, you probably have a lot more insight into what, that's probably the most knowledgeable guy in Beaver County about the mills, about industry, and he runs the Beaver County Industrial Museum in Darlington. So anyone gets a chance, talk to Dawn. But it was just incredible how, and I don't know if you want to get into this now, but
well, actually, but next to questions, you've all kind of touched on it in terms of how the mills and the community were so intertwined. I know when I came here, and obviously I missed that. All this predates me coming there, but I do have a headline that I've used in presentations about how to grow Beaver County, how to attract and retain young families and start to regenerate. There's a headline from the Post-Gazette. The unemployment rate in January of 1983 was 24.7% in Beaver County. For the region, it was like 17.7%. I mean,
Higher than it was during the Great Depression.
Yeah, exactly. And, you think about that, and a lot of people talked about, obviously, the loss of revenue and taxes, but I maintain it was also what you just talked about. It was the brain drain and the labor force drawdown, where if a community or an individual had any problem, there were a bunch of people in the mill that would be there within an hour trying to solve that problem. Can you kind of expand on that stuff a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was horrible. You talked about the food banks. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. One of the worst things I think I ever went through. And I was working there when it, kind of when the bottom fell out, and I still to this day can't understand how this it's not like one steel plant maybe was mismanaged and shut down. It was an entire industry that shut down almost overnight.
And everything is connected
to it. I was working, at that time then, I worked in the tin mill, but when things would slow down, they'd send you to some other mill that, that needed you. And I was in the seamless tube, which was a hellhole. But they were building a new round mill. Correct, Don? I mean, they were building a new, I don't know how much money, millions of dollars they were investing in a new round mill one day, and the next day, they're shutting down. You're talking about a lot of people. I think you mentioned to me when we were starting that at its peak, J&L had 14,000 employees. 7.5 miles long, is that correct, Don? 11. And for like overnight, it wasn't just here, in Aliquippa, it was in Ambridge, and it was in Beaver Falls, and it was in Midland, and it was across the board. I think I had heard at one time that at the time Beaver County maybe had like the third highest per capita income in the state of Pennsylvania, and from that they went to 24.7% unemployment within a matter of months. And it was horrendous. I knew guys who blew their brains out, literally. It was, it's hard to even kind of like describe it now, because we went from, riches to rags, like quick. And even, I was out of work 2.5 years. I finished my degree at Slipper. I graduated cum laude. It's okay, go get a job. 2.5 years. And I had a stack of rejection letters. That was before, that's when you had to send out actually resumes, and you get actual letters back saying, nah, forget it. I had a stack of letters this big, and I kept them for years. I said, that's my humility. Anytime I need to kind of get back down to earth, I just have to look at that stack of letters. Anytime I think I'm better than somebody else or whatever. And it was probably one of the most devastating things toward the heart and like the core out of this area. And like now, we get the cracker plant, there's gonna be 600 jobs, and that's great. It's really great. But when you're talking about, I think, and I'm not sure, and again, Dawn, you probably have this, I think there was between 20 and 30,000 high-paying, family-sustaining jobs lost within a matter of a year, maybe, or 2 years. Yeah, so it was, yeah. So, well, now that I cheered you all up, I'll
pass the mic to Tim and let him try.
What's the question?
Just how the community. You mentioned growing up on College Hill, and just that on how the mill was really so intertwined with it. They were almost one, the community and them, and all the community activities and stuff. Just some reflections on that, if you would.
Yeah, I remember that the Catholic schools, especially. I went to Catholic school in elementary, where I went to St. Philomena's, which was right behind, and then there was St. Mary's down here, and then yeah. But they were so full back then because of all the such a large number of Catholics that worked in the mill, especially, and then also with the schools, and Little League baseball was huge, and the mills really supported. There was another field over behind on the other side of St. Philomena's, along with the 37th Street field on the mill grounds, kind of near there.
Storage facility there
When I
now
was-
or
yeah, it's a
something? Is
storage
that what it-
facility
yeah,
now.
okay.
So, I mean, the baseball leagues and the mills, a lot of the teams were supported by the local union, 1082, which I think was B&W's union. 1082. Was it 1082? So,
1211.
you were 1211? But I just remember, like, all the neighbors, like Ed's saying, people always helped each other with whatever it was. You didn't have to call somebody or pay all, to have things done. It was like everybody worked in the mill in the neighborhood. So everyone pitched together and helped. Everyone knew everybody, and it was like family. And it just, flowed through the community that way. It was like a greater sense of community growing up. Me and my brother always talk about what a difference there is. People, ate with each other, and there was just so many community events and different things that, disappeared because everyone, a lot of people moved away when the jobs were gone. So that's
Less distractions than today with
well, there
cell
were so
phones,
many
social
less-
media.
Yeah, I mean, no cell
The
phones
internet.
at that time. 10 channels on the television. I mean, nobody stayed in the house ever. They didn't have air conditioning either, so who wanted to stay inside, right? And it was hot and smoggy and dusty, but yeah, so.
Tim, how about you?
I think the being intertwined with the community, without question, because of the prosperity in this valley, and there's plenty of folks out there that'll remember this. I can remember as a kid Christmas shopping downtown Beaver Falls. Now I'm 15 years old, so we're going back to the late 60s. You would have to, my mother and dad, of course, would take me. You would have to park down on 5th Avenue because there were no spots on 7th or 6th. And when you were walking down the sidewalk, it was like walking in New York City. It was shoulder-to-shoulder traffic. I tell my boys about this, and they look at me like I have two heads because they can't possibly picture that. But that's the way it was. There was so much prosperity, and touching on Tim's point and the B&W, I can remember on Christmas night, I might have been like 12 years old, and I'd gotten a telescope for Christmas. So I went up to my bedroom. We lived on top of the hill in West Mayfield, and my bedroom had a window, and you could look straight out to the sky. And down over the hill was the B&W. And I lifted that window up to point my telescope out there, and all you could hear were those pipes clanging. And this was on Christmas night, banging away down there. Coming home from St. Philomena's, that's 3 of us now that went to St. Philomena's. When I would walk home up 37th Street, those cars would be parked for those guys that couldn't get into the parking lots. And they had big, huge parking lots. You're all familiar with the one at the East Works, how big that was. Then they made an auxiliary one right across the street. They would be completely full of cars, and those cars would be lined up on the road all the way up to the bridge that goes across into West Mayfield. Just heady days. And if I live to be 1,000 years old, I will never, ever get over looking at the site of where the B&W was, and now it's just flat out gone. We used to, having gone to St. Philomena's, we had recess in the back, and that was adjacent to where the B&W ran. And those guys used to come and sit there and eat their lunches and watch us kids play kickball and stuff like that. There's no vestige whatsoever anymore of that plant that had ever existed. It's just flat out gone. And I'll never get over that. And that's just the B&W. J&L's gone too. Who thought that could even happen? But it did. Sad.
Paul?
I want to touch on a couple things. When you talk about what happened, I don't say what happened. I still say what's happening. That hasn't ended. And that's not good news for him, because that makes his job even more hard, working at the county. Okay? It It hasn't ended. Inflation, 8.5, hasn't ended. We're going for round 2, okay? I hate to disappoint everybody. It hasn't ended. What caused the destruction? I loved what he said. It wasn't one plant. It wasn't 2 plants. It was 80 in the country at a pop. How's that happen? How's that happen? It wasn't personal. I can expand on a little. 2 things, legacy costs. They're nice little words, okay? They're nice little words that they say that most people just blow them away because they don't know what it means when it doesn't apply to them. But if I say, is there any teachers in the room here? If I said legacy costs, would you know what those are? Do you get health care for life when you retire? You have to pay for it. Well, the Steelworkers was guaranteed. You got to remember, for example, I broke my neck in 1991. I had to have my neck rebuilt, parts of my right hip. I had a foot crushed. It was Uncle Mel. Uncle Mel run me over. He was making bonus, man, and I was trying to tell him to move a coil. And he had 7,000 pounds on the front of the Ram. Bill worked over there. He knows what I'm talking about. He parked right on my foot, just crushed my foot. So I have 4 toes that don't work. I still love the guy. Actually, he broke into tears one day. I got too close to his tractor. He had one of them 0 turns he just got, and I got too close to it. He burst into tears. I said, is this still bothering you? He said, hell yeah. I said, dude, I forgave you for that a long time ago, okay? I had just had a hip put in 9 weeks ago, my right hip. Well, I got part of my right hip in my neck from 1991, okay? I'm not complaining. It's just part of the territory, part of the turf. This situation is extremely complicated. I'm going to go off subject a little bit. I think, Jack, you'll recognize it applies. I was reading a dissertation by a Russian scientist. Somebody's getting ready to can me or censor me because I just said Russian, okay? But guy's name was Verdansky, okay? And I wanted to be, before I went to the mill, I wanted to be a forest ranger. I studied Pennsylvania Resources and Conservation. And that's what I wanted to do because I was very introverted, okay? I couldn't have done what I'm doing right now. I couldn't have done this when I was 15 or even 18. I was very quiet. Anyhow, Verdansky did a study. It's called Biosphere and Noosphere. Did a dissertation. Americans would do well to study this Russian scientist. Biosphere, as God made the planet without man's intervention. Noosphere, the mind of the human being. That's what the mills were. We created everything. If I told, for example, our greatest claim to fame at Beaver Falls, I made the warhead shrapnel for the Patriot missile. I also made rotors for Harley Davidson. We made landing gear for Cessna. And one foreman, when I first started there, when I asked him what this was for, he'd say door hinges. I thought we were the largest manufacturer of door hinges in the world. He also used to tell me his grandmother could work harder than me. Okay, and I tell her, get her ass in here. I need help. Okay, he's gone now, but he was a great guy, okay? Best working foreman. But back to Verdansky, biosphere and noosphere, okay? How do we change our living environment? How do we increase our population density? How many of you here think you live in a first world nation right now? Do y'all think you live in a first world nation? What if I told you you didn't?
Well, there are numbers, Paul, and I don't want to interrupt your dissertation on this, but we got a couple more minutes to wrap this up.
Let me leave you with this, okay? An advanced industrial nation is what creates a first world nation. We want to be that again. You cannot do that without the noosphere. You cannot do that without steel and manufacturing. We need to bring it back. I don't know how to do that. It's a very complicated issue. What happened is very complex. It's not just one thing. It's a multitude, a dozen, maybe 24 individual things. People that don't want to pay pensions, people that don't want to pay health care, people that don't want to pay period. They don't want to employ people anymore. I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. How about a round of applause for these guys? Very entertaining. I really appreciate, and again, there's a mutual respect I have for you guys. growing up in similar circumstances. Where I grew up in New Jersey along the Delaware River, it was oil refineries and chemical plants were the same as steel plants here. The demise was happening there. My dad was a lifelong oil refinery worker, and I kind of followed his footsteps a little bit when my college career got interrupted for a whole lot of reasons. But I really, really appreciate you guys coming out and sharing these stories. So you got a glimpse of what it was like in the glory days of the steel mills and how big of an impact that had. And you talked about the schools and stuff. I mean, look what's happening with the diocese and the consolidation there. And we had 45,000 school-age children at the peak in the mid-'70s. We're down around 22,000 today, although we still have 14 school districts, which is another subject we won't get into. But it's quite a change. But just to counter you a little bit, Paul, there's a tipping point. We're moving in the right direction. The population has been increasing since 2015, 2016. Places like Anchor Hocking was just bought out by Stoli Glass. They've invested $7 to $10 million. They're expanding the line there. They employ 350 people. That's the oldest active glass plant in the country. I mean, there's still a lot of good things happening. The cracker plant, while it's only 600 permanent jobs, there's a 3-to-1 ratio of contract jobs. It will employ much more than just that 600. It's bringing ancillary businesses. But the other thing is we're diversifying the economy. We're not putting all our eggs into a cracker plant any more than we should have with the steels, or try to reproduce with the steel mill. So we're moving in the right direction. Things that the CDC is doing here in Beaver Falls. I mean, if you haven't seen a change in Beaver Falls, I know from when I moved here, it's moving in the right direction. What's happening there, small towns are coming back. We've got a lot of great investment coming in, small mom and pop shops turning around. I'm optimistic. I wouldn't be where I was if I wasn't optimistic about the future and trying to do something to facilitate it. And with that, I'd like to show a video that we talked about. You know, again, while I was so excited about this, it's the camaraderie, just the history, the dignity, the respect, and being able to honor the steel workers in the steel industry with that. We produced a video a few years ago that starts on about the future of Beaver County, but it starts with honoring the past and recognizing the past in order to move forward in the future. So, Doug, can you fire that up?
Yeah, I think I can.
I've had the, when I was running the chamber, I had the pleasure of showing that to several school groups and school children, saying, look, I wasn't born and raised in Beaver County. I've lived here 22 years, but never forget where you came from, the pride that's here, and where you're going to help make a new future for Beaver County. And credit goes to Tad McElwicky. Some of you may know Tad from Rhino Productions. He and I put that together, and I'm very proud of that. It's 4 years old now. Needs some update. They have their own commissioners in there. I don't get that. But, so I think the commissioners contributed some money, so they got it. But anyway, I mean, to me, that represents a tipping point of where we're going. It's a great legacy in the past with the steel mills, but we have a bright future ahead of us. And there's a whole bunch of young people here that are going to make that future much brighter here in Beaver County. So thank you all for coming out. CJ?
I got one thing I'd like to say. It's a shame that people talk about steel workers, but you know, probably 80% of the steel workers today that retired or got laid off or whatever only get 3/4 or a quarter of their pension that's promised them. Quarter of their pension. It's a shame.
Paul and I talked about some of the lawsuits that went on for decades or more to try and 14 years get that.
It's a shame that steel workers let these companies underfund our pensions. And that's how it ended up. That's all I got to say.
Always came down to money.
If you worked in the steel mills and were not on the panel, would you be willing to raise your hand? Can we just have an extra round of applause for Ben?
CJ,
Yeah.
there's a guy who can't be here. Pardon me. He moved to Texas. Carl Rose is one of my best friends on the planet. Excuse me. He worked 42 years for public school.
We worked with Carl.
You know Carl.
Yeah.
And when he left, he said, Kenny, when you see that van come down and say goodbye to me. I called him on the phone. He's still alive. You imagine 42 years of mill? I can't imagine that. Those guys, excuse me. Those guys are a dying breed. And they made us happy. He what it is. I swear they did. And it's amazing. I called him on the phone. I thought, God bless you, man. You're still with us. His son come up and got him. He said, Dad, come down here. You're suffering from anemia. You're old. Come down in this warm weather. He's still alive. And he's one of my best friends to this day. Excuse me. Yeah. Thanks.
Reflected on how much those relationships mean.
You know, that guy.
It's all about people. I mean,
It is.
I worked in that
I
industry.
swear it is.
It's still all about people.
Yes, it is
It's not
about
about
people.
anything else other than people, for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I also want to acknowledge Ed Paroli's father was planning to be on this panel and was not able to make it due to health issues, but just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So I don't really have much else other to say other than that's a wrap. We have, yeah, you're welcome. We have from the CDC a handful of small little gifts that we would like to give to all of you as a thank you, and we just really appreciate you spending your evening this way sharing with us. And thank you all for coming. And
Just one last word, if you don't mind. CJ is actually resigning from the CDC at the end of May, so this might be the last time she's in front of a crowd. So let's thank her for her incredible time. She does have thank you, CJ. She does have a cool experience, an opportunity to go to Mexico City for the summer, and so she's looking forward to that. But we really, really appreciate her, the way she serves the community. So thank you, CJ.
yeah, that's all. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.